Hi, I'm Garmbreak1, and this is Midgardia's cool crowdfunding show. I'm here today with a lot of people. uh, why don't y'all introduce yourselves? I guess Joshua first.
Sure. I'm Joshua Archer. I'm the co founder and executive director of the Game Academy. We're a nonprofit that uses tabletop role playing games and LARPs for education and social emotional awareness, etc. You can check out our website at thegameacademy.org. And I'm the principal on this particular Kickstarter, Scourge of Shiran.
And Yeri.
Hi, I'm Jere from Finland. I'm one of the creators of World of Alessia. And yeah, I don't know what what else I should say, but yeah, it's great to be interviewed about this project, and we are really glad to be working with Game Academy with everything regarding World of Alessia and all the education stuff that they are doing. So yeah.
And Yoel?
I'm Yoel Eris. I am one of the writers working for Scourge of Shiran and working together with Josh and Yera and Jay and Mike here to build that world for you guys.
And Mike?
I'm Mike Azzolino. I'm on the board of directors for the Game Academy, as well as a developer and author for the Scourge of Shiran project, and professional game master and freelancer.
And Jay Sonia.
Hey, I'm Jay Sonia, I can pronounce my last name. I'm the owner of Stormby Studios. I am the author of the World of Alessia Primer, a couple of other books, Bloodlines of Black Magic, as you know, Rune, and some other stuff. And I've been making games for a while, so.
Alright, so we're here today to talk about the Scourge of Shiran for the World of Alessia. So, Jerry, why don't you tell us a little bit about the setting first?
Yeah, so the World of Alessia is like sci fantasy setting that's combination of high technology with high fantasy. So most of high future technology is achieved through magic, and it's highly evolved society, like a mega planet that has a lot of different species, and sort of like a utopian feel to it that's relatable to like Star Trek and stuff like that. So, and yeah, and we had a Kickstarter for that, and we are doing. We released the 5e version for the World of Alessia, and we are doing the Starfinder conversion right now. But yeah, it's we had a name for like a sci fantasy that's that really hones the theme of the setting down. We also have a lot of Eastern themes inside, like wushu and all that stuff. But yeah, I think that's basically it. Hyper evolved society that's utopian with high magic and high technology combined through magic. So yeah,
Cool.
Jay, if you wanna maybe add a little bit more.
Alessia is a unique location. It has a lot of the Star Wars, Star Trek elements, but the focus is not on space, and I think that's important. When you're looking at the world of Alessia, we focus primarily on the planet itself, the species themselves, their interaction, their cultures, and their larger problems and challenges. Because Alessia, unlike a lot of settings, isn't predicated on this assumption that there's these racial wars that had to happen and all that. This is a far future setting where all of that nonsense was learned, and those lessons were set aside far in the past. And as a result, the setting is built not on division, but on the idea of collaboration and social cooperation. And it's woven into both the narrative, the cultures that we talk about in the setting, and it's also worked into the narrative, rather the mechanical structure of the game itself in the campaign setting. And we organize that through things like species synergies, loosely through attunement, and some other ideas that focus on building and unifying to solve problems as opposed to just killing and dividing.
Cool. So
Which kind of brought us into the education space.
yeah, I can see the synchronicity there.
Yeah.
I mean, we can teach our kids about violence. We can teach them other things too.
It's a unique problem that I think, and this is and I really hope Joshua jumps in here, but it's a discussion he and I have had many a times over the since at least 2016 when he founded the Game Academy, and that is the idea that when we teach at the game table, when we sit down, whether it's for entertainment, whether it's for to create a mirror for ourselves, to learn more about ourselves, whether it's for therapy, there are a lot of different ways that we can utilize tabletop. A lot of it is done. The Game Academy utilizes it to help their community, to bring people into this educational space, and that's exactly the energy that we wanted to touch when we were creating Alessia, because we want to teach people that things like de-escalation in gaming are okay. Not everything needs to be solved through violence, and not that to say that violence doesn't exist, but understand that the use of force should be mediated. And that whole escalation, de-escalation idea, which should be what law enforcement is predicated on, and current society obviously doesn't see that. So for us, this future society, and it's woven into everything we did, from the peacekeepers to houses of healing, it's a very socialized and civil-minded society.
And I think one of the main reasons is that I wanted to tell like different stories, not everything related to racial tensions and violence and all that stuff, but something that you can play with your kids and teach them something and all that stuff. So,
which, Josh, can we throw the ball to you? Because this is I think, why the Game Academy. I mean, like, we've had this discussion so many times.
Sure.
I think that's why Scourge of Shiran. Well, I know that's why it's happening. So
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, we don't have 3 hours for me to give my typical seminar on this, but I will say from a top level, role-playing games are a tool that access our subconscious and our personalities through a side door. We take down veils, we take down filters, because we establish trust with the people within that circle, and we explore our lives or alternate lives, right? And I am a fan of Dungeons and Dragons and of others, gritty games, cyberpunk, where it's dystopic and you're having to fight against the system, or you're just fighting against monsters, and those have their place. But there's also room at the table for other types of stories, and especially when you're trying to help children raise their consciousness, and even adults raise their consciousness and become better people, we can spend some time at the table imagining a different type of reality. And this is what I think World of Alessia falls into, is this space that allows us. What's that?
Oh, yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Yeah, absolutely. It falls into this space where you're taking the world maybe a little bit more groundedly, and the actions that are falling out of what happens in these scenarios might mimic more what we would idealize as appropriate behavior in the real world. And it lets us practice in that space to find out, like, well, what if we don't use violence and instead we use a de-escalation technique, or we attempt to bring people together as opposed to divide them, or when we find a group of individuals that are causing trouble, we don't just sort of smack them down, but we try to figure out what's going on and figure out if there's something we can resolve, right? Which might, for a typical gamer, sound like, oh man, I want to just kill stuff, and but there's combat in this game. There's conflict in this game. It's not just everybody eating lotuses and hanging out and meditating. It's definitely a very rich, very complex setting, but it is one where your actions have consequence, and you think about things from a human perspective, or a an enlightened perspective. I don't want to use the word human. I mean humane, but this world has very little humans. It's 23 species, and humans are only one of those. It's about reaching past what our current realities are into a possible future that we really would like to manifest. And
well, you know what? And that's kind of a cool thing. Like when you think about, and that's one of those higher level concept discussions Yeti had very early, and the Yeti and I had very early on, is when you think about what you want in the world, right? We talk about enshrining the heroic, standing up to grave injustice, to doing the right thing, we fighting the good fight. There's so many positive story related elements that come into the heroic, but at the same time, we have to remember their place and that we're teaching them, right? Because it's not always about just the cinematic response. It's also about the tension. It's learning to read situations. And the language that we tend to use, ironically enough, because of my degree and my background, tends to be about risk analysis. We take and want to put players, or we're trying to create a space where players, through the vehicle of their characters, put themselves in positions to look at slowing things down. So instead of like the cinematic escalation, like a cinematic die and, doing this and getting it to that tense moment, we look for ways when you can kind of break away from those modes. And I believe, and the term that Josh uses very often is divergent thinking. And I think that's a really important kind of idea, because that phrase alone kind of brought us in a way together between the Game Academy and Alessia, because that's exactly what we're trying to enshrine.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a platform for, creating, well, that's one solution, but what's a better one? Or what's a different one? Or you tried that didn't work. What are you going to do now? And it takes you off the tracks that people, I think, have fallen into in modern times around role play, where you're kind of, we've got reflective natures between role-playing games and video games, that there's a sort of leveling crunch and a cycling around that gaining experience and getting your leveled, and we like those things too, but maybe they're tied to more of a personal evolution and less to wielding a sword all the time.
Fun though wielding a sword can be.
Absolutely.
Yoel and Mike, anything you two would like to add?
Well, just one of the things that I wanted to add in regards of violence and not violence, finding other alternatives. I have really enjoyed working in this space where we seek the non-violent victory conditions first and then build from there. So at the top, we're building this pyramid where we have kind of our best hope is the non-violent condition, all the way down to the last option, which would be fighting, which is kind of a reverse of the dynamics of Dungeons and Dragons or other fantasy and sci-fi role-playing games. And I do appreciate that. I also want to, like Jay was saying, it's not a sterile environment completely devoid of violence, but I believe it's a society that deals with violence in a completely different manner and does not tolerate random acts of violence in the same way that a frontier fantasy society, sure, somebody may act up, they may take an energy weapon into public and actually hurt people, and it's over very, very quickly. These things aren't tolerated. Like they're solved very quickly and with very conscious kind of solutions. And I like that those mechanics have been applied to our development. It has been challenging. I'll be completely honest, Garm. It's been really challenging to develop in this space. It's not about fantasy. Like, put me in fantasy, I can build you monsters, encounters, puzzles, problems. I can make you maps. I can do everything. Put me in modern settings, same situation. Put me in Alessia, and I'm like, I really have to think about this for a while. And then I would be like, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And Jay would say, well, yeah, but it's not really like that, because people don't think of the gods like that in Alessia. It's like this. And, there aren't these species tensions like you're kind of just underlying things. If you think about it, I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Okay, let me go back and think about that. So it's been kind of an evolution for me on the development and on the writing aspect of it to try to find my space within someone else's vision. In another interview, I akined it to Robert Lynn Aspirin in Thieves, the Thieves Tales from the Vulgar Unicorn, that kind of setting, where he brought in all these different authors to kind of write stories within his books, within his setting. And it kind of feels that way. It's very empowering. And I appreciate the opportunity a whole bunch.
That is a great analogy, Mike, and it's also very much what I think that what you guys are doing about with Scourge of Shiran too, right? Because Scourge of Shiran is essentially the Game Academy signing up to take some of the space that we have, scheduled for development, but later on down the pipeline, and they're like, no, we want to do this stuff now, right here. And it's been interesting to talk to our backers about, because with some backers that had some initial knee-jerk reactions that were slightly negative, because they were like, oh, you're late on this and the conversion's still taking time, and now there's another Kickstarter, what are you doing? And I'm like, we're growing and expanding. That's what we're doing. We're partnering up with a wonderful team, and the people you're talking to here aren't the only developers working on this, right? They might be the only folks talking right now, but I mean, there's other cool people that, Josh, I'm not taking that thunder from you, so I'll let you drop those particulars. But
yeah, we can talk about that.
Like, they're absolutely doing all this heavy lifting and developing all this cool content that's like speeding up how we're able to expand the world, which for me is like, that alone kind of discusses that trust relationship, because they've got to go in spaces and make decisions that aren't watched by everything we do. I mean, they are initially, but after a while, they're just going to go off and do their own thing. It's cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of trust at this table, both directions, about, how we want the world to develop, how we want the content to be placed out there. And I think, it's won through conversation, and we've talked a lot. And, Jay and Yeri are very protective of their world, and they should be. And so, initially it was like, well, okay, what's going on here? But as we talked, we're like, okay, you get it. I get it. We know where this is going. And it's been wonderful, and we were able to bring in some talent to help us, that has some recognition in the industry. I mean, we have Owen Casey Stevens that's helping us on this project. We've got Stephen Radley McFarland that's helping us. We've got David Silver, who's helping on this. So we've got and Loki. What's his real name?
George Williams. Yep.
Thank you, George Williams. I just know him as Loki.
We've got some other folks here. Like, I've got some of my development team that wants to put in a little bit here and there. People like Jenny Jarzabski, but I don't want to throw names on the Kickstarter. We chose not to, because like their workloads prohibit that. So there are definitely other names we'd love to loop in and who have soft committed to things, but nobody right now.
Yeah.
220 being what it is, and the next year being kind of weird space. We're only adding names your guys are only adding names.
And if we're talking about talent, I just have to say this unique relationship between the Game Academy and Storm Bunny Studios has allowed a continuity of art direction because of the massive amounts of art assets that they have put together prior to our project, and making these things available to us for our project, and making the artists who did a lot of the art, if not most of the art for the original project, we got access to them to do custom pieces as well. So it has been an amazing experience, and to be able to bring that same kind of artistic direction and vision from the original project onto ours, it is going to feel seamless. People are going to pick up this book, and they're just going to be like, wow. They're not going to be able to see where one stops and then the other begins. It's going to be amazing.
Right. Yeah. Angel Huerta is one of the artists, the main artists for a lot of the character work that you're going to see in that book. And we do have Septimus doing the cover, correct? I believe at this point in time. So the art is consistent, and the layout and the presentation is consistent. The only thing that we're adding is a lens, which is for the educator. And so this project is having two different distinct layouts. One of them is for the casual player, and it'll look like what you expect. It'll still have call outs for some of the educational things we're referencing because we find them interesting, and we think that, you know, game masters are going to find these things interesting. Anything from linguistical ties to, you know, scientific, you know, STEM based patterns. But for the educator version, these things are going to get elaborated. They're going to be pulled out. The educator is going to get a chance to figure out how to hook it into the lessons they're required to teach for education, either through, you know, in a classroom setting, or if people are doing homeschool, they'll have the standards that things match up against, and so they'll know that this is all standards aligned. This is and we're also producing a workbook for the players / students, so they can track their progress, keep their analysis of what's going on level to level, and even write answers to problem sets that maybe they'll get tied into by their educator as a side note when they reach certain circumstances in the adventure. So we're really taking that aspect and kind of ballooning it up. A lot of us had the experience in our lives where role-playing games have exposed us to a lot of academics or other types of interest levels, you know, interest subjects. And this is allowing for that sort of natural motivation to get some reinforcement.
Right, and that's a handy segue to the scariest word in the title, Edu-Adventure. So,
Right.
why don't you tell me a little bit about that concept?
Yeah, and you know, this is something that I think we're all kind of walking onto the ice and kind of holding our breath a little bit, because we know that edu is not sexy. You know, the word edu, like you smell it, you're like, oh, you're gonna teach me something.
It's not
You know,
sexy.
but the truth of the matter is that we want people to be able to see what's going on here, right? And this is going to really the focus is to understand this is going to be a kick-ass adventure that everybody's going to have a great time playing. It's well written, it's got good authors involved, the plotting is great. It's gonna kick your, it's gonna
insane.
Yeah, it's gonna knock your socks off, and we're giving it an extra boost so that this beautiful so the reason we're writing this initially is that the Game Academy runs a summer camp. And every year we run 4 stories. Each of them is a week long. But during this last year pandemic, we did them 2 weeks with every other day for 4 hours because we didn't want to burn our children's brains out with too much screen time. But we write these stories, and they're written by, you know, expert storytellers and educators, and it gets, you know, the kids get to see this every single year. But this is something we're like, well, we'd like to take what we normally do and our expertise and bring it to the world, you know, and kind of show them, hey, you can have an enriching experience that's fun and educational and even count for something, you know, officially, right? So we can have that line through so that, you know, people, you know, kids and adults can have a great time playing something, but also learn something at the same time.
Which is the dream. So, what kind of like educational level is this Edu-Adventure aimed at?
You know, there's going to be a graduation of this. That the topics and the places that we hit, you know, are going to be, you know, anything from geology to biology, perhaps a little bit of genetics, definitely scientific theory and how to explore information, but also sociology, learning how to build trust networks, you know, and understanding partial knowledge, and then we have things that tie into linguistics. Some of the things that we've created have sort of academic underpinnings, and we're, you know, eager to show those things off. So it kind of opens up this possibility to explore certain things. Like one example is we have a group of individuals that are mimicking the functionality of Sherpas, which are a group in Tibet that have a very specific history and a very specific meaning, but their names actually come from the Tibetan word for the East, people of the East. Sherpa is the people of the East, but we're talking about people in the North. So we found out and researched that the name Shangpa would be much more in alignment with that, with that energy, but also being more accurate. So we're nodding to the Sherpa group and including parts of their language. So we get to talk about, Tibetan culture and talk about, the Sherpas and how it relates to what we're doing. The educational levels, we're talking, there'll be levels for grade school, middle school, high school. There might be opportunities for higher than that if, people want to work that direction. But the topics you can scale them depending on how deep you want to go.
Jay, I believe you had something to...
I was just going to say that when we first came to the project, I had asked Josh almost the same question. He was just like, if you can keep it in a 10-year spectrum and stay within 8 to 18, he's like, if you can teach low-level educational lessons, things like basic civil lessons to an 8-year-old that's like sharing is good, hitting is bad, and also teach the higher level, because higher level sociological impact of, say, like voting is a good thing and your voice is heard, those sorts of civics lessons or STEM-based lessons are obviously not the same thing, but like depending on what areas you want to move into. Now we're moving into high school, so we're moving in that 18 plus areas. So for us, we've been designing into 3 categories. We have the very young, which is your 8 to 11. And then I believe it was 12 to 14 for the second group, and then 15 to 18 or 15 above for the third group. So we've been kind of operating in those 3 categories in terms of how we scale our challenges.
All right. That is quite the diverse range there.
It's challenge to work in, though. I mean, like, it's because there's a lot of adventures where it's just, these is for younger adults and the lessons are simplified. So, the call outs help. Yeah. And that's why educational, like the layout is literally different for the educational version because it has to take extra sidebar space. It's a literal third column that makes those call outs and kind of gives the GM/educator a little more of that intel so they can make better decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we don't like to talk down to our audience, even if they're 8-year-olds, right. We believe that 8-year-olds are people too. And we should not underestimate them. I've met some brilliant 8-year-olds in the tenure at the Game Academy. And I've met some adults in my personal gaming that have something to learn from them. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the idea of stepping people away from their entitlements and their preconceived notions, the fact that the Game Academy makes that a baseline for their behaviors is one of the things that made us more considerate of them for working in the Alessia space, because we are protective of it and we want to set the right sorts of examples. We don't want to be just another science fiction setting that does the same thing. We want to look for a different future and trying to live up to something like Star Trek, and we don't want to replicate that, obviously. And but some of those lessons, those are big shoes to fill. So they're been doing it for what, 4 years now, going on 5 years. When's your birthday for the Game Academy, Josh?
So January 2016 is when we incorporated as a nonprofit, but 4 years before that, we were running Yokari Games, which was a for-profit version. And we went nonprofit because we wanted to increase our reach and be able to help kids who, can't necessarily afford what is essentially a leisure activity for many, and out of disposable cash. I mean, if we were charging what it would require on a profit basis to run this company, only the wealthy kids would be able to participate. I mean, even at our normal rates, it's all subsidized. We work through donation subsidies and grants and things like that. So we knew that our purpose was just to help people and to reach as many people as possible. So that's why we did the nonprofit incorporation. But we've been at this for 8+ years. So
right, and I'm a firm believer in this kind of thing can really help people get on a better path, I guess. Mm-hmm. I've told the story a couple of times on stream, but one of my childhood best friends got into drugs. I got into D&D, and look where we are now. So
Yep.
Yeah.
So what now that we've covered the meta framework of what an Edu-Adventure is and what the world of Alessia is, what's the Scourge of Shiran about?
Well, let's see how much we can show a little bit of ankle without showing too much leg. We want to make sure that we don't ruin the story. I know, Jay, you're cringing. That's
our analogies are sometimes cringy, but that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be cringy there.
Hey, I behaved myself this time.
I'm so proud of you, Mike.
The point being, the Shiran is this continent that might be akin. You can think of maybe Eurasia, or perhaps even thinking about a more frontiers version of North America, where you've got sort of more forested lands below a certain sort of line, then you've got a mountain range that holds off this frozen wasteland called the vastness. All right, so the people of Shiran have evolved in that space. You've got giant folk, the Jotun folk, that have evolved in that space. You've got a number of the animal species, the yokai, that have been there. Ilk folk, or deer folk, which are like anthropomorphized elk and things like that. You've got the Harpians, who are harpies as a playable species, which are very interesting, and they have a complex history, and they've been in that place. I don't want to go into that, but above the mountain line, you've got this vastness, which is just frozen tundra, icy, not hospitable. And nothing really lives out there that doesn't want to live out there on purpose. And you've got groups of the Jotun folk that find their way in that space. You've got these roving megafauna, half machine, half magical, bonded with animal spirit barges, big things that rove the vastness on their own terms. Inside those are living communities of rabbit folk known as the Year, who have a very interesting culture and history. And in this setting, you've got reports of something weird happening. That you've got individuals in the main city of Kolg, which is just south of that area, and an observatory who are keeping tabs on things, and new types of events are happening. There are these disturbances of storms that carry with them fragments of crystal and rock called shard storms that are tearing through the area. You've got areas that the whole world has magical ley lines and a crystal lattice structure underneath, and that is being monitored by people, the Order of Astronai, who really care about that being stable, and it's not stable. Something's happening. You've got maybe some aerial heat photography that's showing that there's a spot out there that's not normal, and so the party, the members, are called forth based on their associations by different factions to go and investigate and figure out what's going on out there. And while they go through that, they meet different groups and cultures, from the Seekers of the Sacred Way, which are the Weaseling Shangpa that we talked about, that take them out into the vastness and keep them protected against the harshnesses that are out there, to the Frigid Flyers, which are this group of think of them like a biker gang, but with hovering vehicles or vehicles. Dashers.
Yeah.
He's always correcting me because I say it wrong, and I didn't want to say something and say it wrong.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. He's gonna do it. He's gonna do it.
Who are most people kind of look at that group with a bit of reverence and awe, maybe a little bit of fear, because they're very territorial. And the party has to sort of enter into this world of the vastness, and the sort of rumor or the thought of the vastness is the farther you go in, the weirder that gets, and people just don't know what's going on. So they're having to trek through this environment, and they get clues about what's happening along the way, and disturbances and unnatural events and happenings that lead them to this place. And then they have to discern what's going on, what are the causes, what do they have to work with. they're having to collect data and transmit that data back to the factions that are employing them.
Yeah, there's some fun STEM related challenges in this
Right.
adventure that I'm really excited about, because you see a lot of that classic hero versus environment trope utilized, where it's less focused on getting into these frequent battles, and your battle largely as the PCs is with time, the situation, and the environment you're dealing with, which just makes it a lot more fun.
Right, and they're bumping
I
into
would
these.
say that that is exactly right. That the journey and it's more like that you have a mystery that you have to solve, and you have to find clues, and it's educational. The educational part is already the beginning of the journey, and then you can already see a lot of different ideas that Alessia has, that has like you have the environment that actually instead of like fighting monsters, you have to actually survive in the environment, and that's you can already see a different kind of tropes that we are using in Alessia to differentiate from different games. So
Though we are fighting monsters, there are monsters. To believe me, there
Oh,
are.
those monsters are.
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
You
And
can't
that's
have a
real.
world that evolves that doesn't evolve in the other direction as
Right.
well.
So some of that environment is filled with cultures that you can learn to get along with, and some of that environment is filled with creatures that would rather put you in their belly. So you got to discern which is which, and it's not always obvious. And that's a part of what's going on here too, is that perspective matters, and what you think you might know, you figure out you're wrong, or you have to expand your understanding. And that's where I don't want to say too much, because we're getting into content that I'd rather you experience through the game. But there are some twists and some turns and some realizations along the way that I think both the characters and the players will grow through that experience.
Right. The horse-faced guy with the lightning hammer might not actually be an enemy. You never know.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So, Yoel, I'm going to put you on the spot here. What's your role in the project?
So, like I said, I'm a writer. I'm the resident linguist. So I'm doing a lot of work on these societies that were alluded to living in the giant moving constructs, and my role is creating that culture because they are pivotal to the storyline. So I can't say too much about them, but getting into that angle of making sure that there's a little bit of a bizarre perspective. I come from a very different background compared to all these other folks here. And so I am bringing along a slightly different perspective that I'm using to inject into the writing in that particular arena. I do have a background in education, like Josh does here, but from an educated perspective rather than an educator perspective. And I don't want to get too much into that because it's irrelevant for the moment. But suffice to say that it creates a little bit of a twist that will hopefully engage the players' minds in a way that other systems and other settings don't have the opportunity to.
Right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that. Culture in tabletop games can be a touchy issue. I'm aware.
Right, and I think that's an important thing to bring up too, because we are very conscious about appropriation, and we're trying to make sure that if there are relations that we draw, that we make them explicit and we draw lines. Like
that was a requirement for us. So one of the baselines for going into Alessia. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Josh. I'm not sorry, but just to side on this for a second. Alessia is not an Asian monoculture, and we're not in a position to write that, and nor would we want to. So Yeti was very clear early on that we make sure that we present a space that anybody could work within, and so that it's not all just. So in that sense, we tried to pull some specifics away, even though we do lean heavily into the Chinese elements of some Chinese myth, because it is wuxia. You can't do wuxia and not mention Hong Kong and China, right? But we didn't want to lean fully into that, and it's certainly not a replication of those. It's more in the 1980s style approach to what if this ethnicity of humanity, which is still a minority on the planet because humanity is only one of 27 plus species. What if it was the dominant culture in whatever frame that the GM chooses to approach? And we've had potential partners in South Korea say, hey, we love this because it could very easily be applied to South Korea. In fact, a lot of my stuff was intuited from living in Japan. So we've tried very hard to make that an opportune space for people to work in. And then when something like the Shengpa happens, that is transparently called out, like, hey, this is why we did this. This is our thinking behind this, and this is the culture we're trying to honor by including it, so that those inclusions are seen in that light as inclusions, not an attempt to copy somebody else's culture and just shape it into whatever suits our need, because that's at the heart of appropriation, and nobody on this team wants to do that.
Damn, that was a really eloquent explanation.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this as a publisher and taking and listening to a lot of people from very diverse backgrounds and getting their input, because you're going to see just this cis white guy talking about it. But this is me almost a decade later publishing and taking as much feedback from as many creators as humanly possible, so that I'm publishing content that is accessible by as many people as possible.
Right.
It's practiced somewhat because it's engaged frequently. We talk about this a lot in our creative spaces, and we talk about the impact of what design means at the table as well. So when we make an presumably arbitrary design decision that's played out at the table, it could create fights. And, like when somebody says, I'm just playing my character, that is generally a red flag problem. And so when we created Alessia, we didn't want to create these inherent hobgoblins that people were just playing their character and then creating these like divergent, disturbing kind of entities at the table that weren't working for people. So sorry, I just totally went on my rant, but yes, it's all about Shengpas being called out in the sidebar so that people are transparent. I'm so sorry, Josh. That's a passion of mine, and I'll shut up.
Hey, me too. I agree with everything you say.
Not everything. Maybe in this statement.
In this moment.
Yes. Thank you.
not blanket. That is not blanket. But in this case, yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Agree with everything in this specific sentence. Yes.
Sorry, Josh. I totally kind of took that over, and I apologize.
No, I think that was a great add-on. That's fine.
This is a heck of a project. Sorry, Yara, you were going to say something?
Yeah. I think I'm gonna step away at this time. It's 2 a.m. here, so it was really nice to be part of this, and I hope you guys have a great day. So
Pleasure talking to you.
Yeah.
We'll
thanks.
talk to you
Bye.
All right. Take care.
Yeah.
Get
Good
some
night.
sleep.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I mean that's another thing is that we are because we have developer in Finland, and we have multiple perspectives. We need more, I think, at the table in general. But this is something that is of value to us, and to really take a much more of a worldwide view on things and not just work from our North American perspective.
Yeah. That's one of the things, and I'm a former expat, so I lived in Japan for some time. I spent, I don't know if we ever covered this, Garm, before in another interview, but I spent almost a decade, I spent 7 years in the Middle East. So, and I traveled the world. Not that I'm somehow an expert on culture as a result, but we try to be very mindful that when we create content and it goes out to a global market, it can be seen in a very constructive light, or it can be seen in a super negative light. And the last thing anybody on this team wants to put out is we're just dumb Americans, right?
We may be dumb Americans, but we don't want to put that out,
right? Like when we want to aim a little higher in that regard. And that's something we constantly evaluate, and it's made me very grateful to work with these, the individuals at hand, because everybody that's on these teams, we have these discussions on the regular. So we constantly check each other. So I'm not going to let them make any assumptions, but they'll call me on my BS if I start promoting an idea and they're like, Jay, actually, that's kind of a bad idea, and we can walk it back. It'll certainly happen that way. We've got good energy, I guess, when it comes to development, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have attuned, my friend.
That's right. That's right.
It's important to have that kind of like trust and accountability, I guess. I had one player in a I don't want to say Asian theme, but in the Mists of Akuma setting, he wanted to play like a chef who uses a wok as a shield and like chopsticks as weapons. And I'm like, yeah, that's a bit much. You might want to
Look, Rich. Yeah.
let's try. Let's come back at that and try that again.
Yeah. Why don't you be an
That's
American
awesome.
that fights with hot dogs? Yeah.
Yeah.
I would. It's like the Super Sentai guy who has like a cheeseburger phone with a like cheeseburger shuriken in it. It's like that. Love that guy.
Real full
I
fights.
don't know what that is, but I mean,
It-
it might just because is it Mists of Akuma? Because I may have
No, that's
Okay.
Super Sentai is what Power Rangers is adapted from, and
Oh.
they have an American character in the ninja themed season who has like a cheeseburger cell phone. He can take the cheese slice out of it and use it as a shuriken, and he's got like
that
you know,
I was
like,
unaware of.
dresses like a cowboy, a weird mix of cowboy and ninja. It's a whole thing, but it's like that. Except Super Sentai is that. It's a weird show, man.
Okay, I have obviously missed it. Yeah, you mentioned Miss of Akuma. We actually had that proved. I have a friend who lives in Japan who teaches English there. He's been living in Japan for 20 years. His name's Ryan, and he is an English professor in Japan. And he took Miss of Akuma, the very first edition when we did it, and did sensitivity reading. Him and his wife is Japanese national. He's obviously he lives in Japan, but yeah, he took that to his class, and they actually did sensitivity testing, and and we wanted to check language and stuff like that. So it was something that Mike and I were very, very passionate about very early on. So some of those best practices, even though they're completely different games, by the way, like Alessia versus like Miss of Akuma, which is very much in Japanese space. Like it's not trying to be in any other cultural space. Where the world of Alessia is absolutely not in any given one space, and if it had to go anywhere, it would be closer to a Chinese culture.
Right.
So
Yeah, absolutely. Fun setting though. I really like Mists of Akuma as well. And
I always mispronounce it too.
Yeah.
If you're pronouncing it correctly, I mispronounce it all the time, and Mike Myler corrects me. He's like, "Stop mispronouncing the setting." I'm sorry.
The emphasis is on the A.
Yeah, you gotta like try not to overpronounce it. Like you gotta say Akuma, not Akuma, because then that's even weirder.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. I've spent way too much of my time watching subbed anime, so I'm at least broadly familiar with.
I studied Japanese for 10 years, so.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yoel has his own very interesting travel.
I have a mysterious past.
Yeah.
I am tragically a monolingual Anglophone. I know like a little bit of Latin, and that's about it. I don't even know French.
Well, that's you live next door to that.
There are communities in my province that primarily speak French, and all their signage is in French. So like, I can read some of it. I can tell you the bibliothèque is a library. I can make mac and cheese with the French directions, but that's about it.
How many languages do you speak, Yoel? Now I'm curious.
To attain a level of fluency, I would say 3, including English. I speak Hebrew because my father's from Israel, and then Japanese because I studied it. But then I speak little bits and pieces of numerous other languages just by sheer study and willpower.
Nice. I love Duolingo for that. Like I speak enough Spanish to get me in and out of college. Like I lived in Japan for a little while, so I speak a little bit of Japanese, and a little bit of Arabic, and more enough to get me in and out of trouble, I suppose there. But Duolingo, man, if you guys, all right, we're off interview, but no, that's off interview. I don't mean we're off interview, but yeah, like that's why more people don't use those apps and learn languages just blows my mind, because what it does to your brain, like the way you access information. And that's another thing that we talk about all the time when you're approaching different challenges like learning a new language or learning a new culture. All the associations, the mental kind of orbiting elements, I suppose, that come with pedagogy, all those things are naturally part of what we do when we do tabletop. I mean, clearly illustrates all of these things, like the daily challenges that we might pick up this, plastic cup, and that's a DC 5, right? Like, but when you have to frame it or gamify those elements, if there's a chance of failure, most GMs are never going to be like, I need a check every time you take a step because you're walking, because that's just silly. But when it comes to your risk assessments, when it comes to doing things you might not normally do in your routine life and stepping outside, the chances to learn to do something differently, to be heroic, that's the spaces that we're working in, and being able to identify those, and that's what Josh does with this. He's like, oh, you're doing this, you're doing this, and that's what kind of makes it such a fun thing to do as well.
Yeah, I've been able to, because of my master's in education, gain a vocabulary and an understanding of certain methodological and pedagogical approaches. So when you take the lens and you aim it at role-playing games, you're like, oh my God, this is a perfect learning environment.
It is.
Yeah.
That DC 5 check is why my drinks are stored on the opposite side of my tower, by the way.
I feel that, man.
Always roll
one. Had too many close calls, and they're like half of my net worth is this tower.
Yeah. Don't break that.
Yeah.
So, if I wanted to pick this up and like donate it to my local school's D&D club or whatever, is there an option for that in the Kickstarter, or just get the book and whip it at the door? That works too.
There are a number of options for getting this into the hands of educators. First off, there is an educator pack as one of the rewards that will create something that's perfect for sort of the game table for an educator. Gives you, a copy of the actual module, Scourge of Shiran. Gives you a set of PDFs of the world setting for not only the educator game master, but also the student players. And it's important that we gave actual licenses for those things to show that, they're paid for. They're not just copying the one version and giving it to everybody. This is ownership, but everything's at cost at that level. All of those things for an educator, we're not making any money. Okay. And that includes the student workbooks and everything like that. Also, any pledge you make, you can add an extra $10, and it will give a PDF of the adventure to an educator that either you choose or we choose. If you don't have anybody that you know, and you just like, I want to give it to somebody who's going to use this in the classroom, we're going to take a list of people who want that, and we're going to hand those out. On our first day of the Kickstarter, we said any pledge that comes in above a certain level, we will be giving a copy to educators. We'll probably do that on the last day as well to try to get people round up for that. Again, we're happy to put this in the hands of educators as much as possible. We're really just trying to make the project have the funds for us to manifest in the way we want. But our goal at the Game Academy is to, promote learning, and this tool, I think, is a really good way to do that. So,
yeah, and even if you're, not somewhere within the range of 8 to 18 years old, this module probably will, teach you stuff.
We took the Pixar approach.
Right. Yeah. Multiple audiences.
I was super clear about that. Like, I think we did it well too.
I was gonna ask if you meant multiple audiences, or there has to be a woman with a giant ass in every single setting.
No, we didn't go. I didn't know that was the Pixar approach. I didn't know.
Oh no, that's DreamWorks. Frick.
What? Am I like?
We're missing something. Should we rewrite?
Crap! I didn't know I was gonna have to focus on that. What? No. In that we're not doing any veiled humor or anything, but we also understand that there's an adult audience. So there's going to be challenges that an adult will approach differently than a child will. When I say the Pixar methodology, Pixar, as we all kind of well know, has a habit of creating dual level humor. So there's humor that the child gets, and then there's humor that their parents can also get. Like, oh yeah, I could use a glass of wine about now. I mean, the kid doesn't get it, but the adult does, right? And so there's the same problem-solving approach in some of, not all, but some of the encounters in Scourge of Shiran. And so when you see that age range, you expect that the 8-year-old will probably respond this way, where the 18 plus adult, depending on the maturity and education, may react a different way. And a lot of people might just react in the middle.
Yeah. I was gonna say people over the age of 18 don't normally need to be taught that sharing is good and hitting is bad, but
Oh, have you seen our prison system?
Sometimes.
yeah, mine too, buddy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh,
More
fair
than we
enough.
should
Yeah, I
hope.
forget. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's the thing too, and that comes back down to like at the core of what we're doing. You look at what outsiders frame gaming as. If you go back to the 1980s and you put a say religious spin on gaming, it's an evil thing. If you put an educational spin on it, it's a tool. How we frame and understand what we do at tabletop is incredibly important to what we learn. And as a pedagogy tool, it's been proven time and time again to serve humanity in its best ways. So the fact that it gets spun is often just because people have agendas. They want to create fear or control. They don't really, I mean, if all these systems are propagated to make the world a better place, really spent all that money and time and energy making it, we wouldn't have half the problems we have. And yet the same lessons are propagated and sold to people, but the world doesn't seem to be getting better. So maybe by teaching in entertainment. Like, instead of, I like Bruce Willis and I want some diehard moments in my life every once in a while where we just get to be heroic and let our ego act first. But that's not really what solves problems. It's diplomacy. It's not hitting the button. It's talking to our neighbor, not shooting the zombie. So what we energize around, what we socially exercise around, as opposed to what we can and should do. And I don't want to use should because it's a little dogmatic, but I mean, in terms of what's best for society and people sitting at the table, that's what we're trying to do here. And that should inspire and be heroic. That should bring people to the table because that's what we want.
Right. The idea is
I think
to.
that also.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I'm on the interview. You go ahead.
Oh. I was going to say that I think that that's one of the really beautiful things about the way that we're building Scourge of Shiran is that there's a lot of attention being placed towards giving people options and tools when they are engaging in a specific environment. And so when you have everyone knows the saying, right? If all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so if we are able to, as writers and as educators and as game masters, to provide people who are playing these games with a whole slew of tools, if they've got a smorgasbord in front of them that they can pick and taste from things, then that's how they're going to be able to react in real life when they come across situations that they weren't expecting or that they aren't familiar with. And it's going to breed a much more vibrant and intellectual culture.
Right, and we make affordances in the game where, maybe gamers who have been playing for a long time have never tried these other types of alternatives because the games haven't supported them, right? Yeah. We have different success criterion, and it's a broad range of different options that you have, just like in life, right? And your actions have consequences. If you choose one version versus another version, one route versus another route, that propagates down the line. So how you act along the way does matter.
Absolutely, because it matters in real life, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I mean, and it's we don't expect fantasy has to be a perfect replica of how things happen in real life, because if we did that, then we'd be back to the same old settings where it's predicated on racial distrust and people never living up to their potential. But we are trying to imagine a different place and even a future in its most idealistic manner, like where humanity gets along. It's still going to have outsiders that covet those resources, and that's a big part of what LSE is about, because without spoiling anything, as people go out and adventure through Scourge of Shiran, it starts to identify some of those forces that might be competing for resources on the planet that the PCs were not aware of, and some of the larger global threats that lie just outside of what they perceive as the ideal.
Yeah, that makes me excited. I can't wait for people to play
I
this
know,
game.
I know. We had our session 0 for our so we've got a whole adventure that takes place between these adventures that we're playing on the side, and we're just like, oh, we gotta go to.
Oh yeah, that's good to mention because we're going to be editing and broadcasting that on the Game Academy's Twitch channel. So we'll have an opportunity for people to see what this play looks like.
Nice. I'll have to follow you guys, and there should be a link to your Twitch channel below. It's the Game Academy, I assume.
Yes.
All right.
Exactly. The Game Academy 501c3 because the Game Academy was taken by somebody else.
And that's
you might be able to apply and get that from Twitch, though.
Possibly, yeah. We'll work on it, but this is good for now.
Yeah. Yeah. This I really want to run this, and I had like sworn off running more 5e stuff, but you're tempting me, you
Yeah.
scoundrels.
And that, you know, this has also, I mean, the world of Alessia is being ported
We are
and released.
converting to Starfinder. Yeah, we're like, and people, like I said, we've had some people a little upset because the conversion was supposed to be done for June of this year. And it just absolutely 20. I could explain waterfall and project management and conversion and why, you know, I don't. 2020, man, just 2020.
We're
We're
all
just
done.
gonna leave it at that. We're gonna
Yeah.
say 2020 happened, and we are actively working on it. We will get there. Like, and yeah, so this will be available hopefully in Starfinder as soon as Starfinder releases officially with Alessia, and then conversions go smoothly. It'll be available for that as well.
Exactly.
Excellent. Well, I think that about covers all my questions. Anything you three would like to bring up while you're here?
Man, we've already talked a lot. Mostly.
Yeah, people are probably sick of hearing of us, but I would just say, you know, follow the Kickstarter, come and check us out. We're doing interesting things. We're trying to do some, you know, weekly designer developer fireside chats on Mondays. We're going to be releasing content, you know, on a weekly basis of what we've got going on. We're going to keep it interesting for people, you know. So what we just really need is your support to make this idea a reality. I mean, I'm going to write it anyways because I have to write for summer camp. But if you want to have a copy of it, we need to make the Kickstarter work.
Yeah. And it's so many cool people involved in such a cool adventure. Like, I definitely wish we had done, like, the evil EDU, like, that we went with. Like, I was totally on board. I'm like, okay, this is cool. But, like, I was like, but will people get it? And we definitely, Josh was pretty clear. He wanted educators to see it first. And I think they have. And I think that's been, and this is no finger pointing or anything. I think it's made it harder to market it to normal gamers because they don't understand this is also just a cool adventure. They see the EDU right up front and think, well, I don't want to teach my gamers. Well, maybe they don't in that accent either, but you know, I don't know what they do. I don't want to like post-cultural norms.
Right. No, I think it is that is the hurdle, you know, and there had been debates of whether or not we say that or not, but it is what differentiates this project from other game projects. There's 1,000 game modules out there. There's only one that does this so far that I've seen. Now, if you're doing something and I'm speaking out of turn, talk to me because I want to see it. But this is something new.
And keep in mind, like I don't think anybody here assumes that we've got a full like vision of everything out there. So there very well may have been people in like other parties that have done similar things, but we're not aware of them. And I know that we certainly looked for, you know, there's like No Thank You Evil, and there's some other
which is great.
Great games, but this is what we're doing is a little bit different. Like, and it's designed to target educators specifically, you know, and
still be a kick-ass adventure. You know, this is not dumbing it down. This is not making it simple. This is not colored blocks. This is I want to play this anyways.
Yeah. I love the idea that like when X happens and Y happens, and then like, wait, there's a scientific reason why this event occurred, and then you can discover that and still do still checks, or you know, you still use in-game powers to resolve the problem. To me, that's just cool. It's like stuff I wanted to do in my science lab all the time, but you only got 45 minutes in class, so you only got 45 minutes of cool stuff. We're trying to do like all day cool stuff from sun up to sundown, which is high energy, but you know. Hopefully quotable.
Jay, it's always a joy to talk to you.
Oh, I don't know why. It's probably Lucy craziness.
Do you have any final words that you'd like to
add? I don't know that there's much that I can say that hasn't already been said by the amazing contributors that we have here, but I think I agree on all points. And I mean, one of the things I guess that did pop up in my head was that one of the unique aspects about this particular project is that it is not a new game system that is built for a certain kind of storytelling, which happens a lot, that someone will come up with, oh, we want this certain kind of engagement, so we're going to make a new system, and it has all these special rules for the way that all this works, right? We're building an environment on top of 5th edition D&D, right? It's already a system that was built for one thing specifically, and we're taking it and we are contorting it to do what we want. So we're taking advantage of that familiarity that people have with this system and running with it instead of trying to push a completely brand new, you've got to learn all these weird rules that you weren't used to, and it's this third party thing that no one knows about, so convincing your friends to play it's going to be impossible. And that whole thing we're avoiding entirely, and we're just saying, here's this world, it runs on a different concept, and now here, run with it using tools you're already familiar with.
That is a really good point. And I think that's why none of my friends will play the My Little Pony RPG with me, is because it's a different system and everything. I think that's it.
It might be. You can try Pony Finder. David Silver wrote that, so
I could try Pony Finder.
hey, friendship is magic, man.
Yeah.
There's no judgment in this circle.
I liked the My Little Pony RPG. That was good times.
I joke, but I really do want to run it on stream sometime.
Yeti totally just sent me. He's like, I'm so excited about this. I still can't sleep, and I'm like, dude, it's been like, go to bed. Like,
Right.
Well, I think that about wraps it up.
Thank you, Garm. It's been really great to talk to you and talk to your audience about what we're doing, and I'm excited about that. Hopefully, there'll be a link to the Kickstarter down below. You guys can come check it out, and we'll answer any questions you have.
Yeah, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you folks as well. And if you leave any comments, I will do my best to pass them on. Yeah, have a good night, everybody.
hey, thanks a lot for talking to us, Carmen. It's been awesome.
For sure. All right, night.